It started in childhood. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting because I think my mom had at one point asked me if, I remember her asking me if my dad had ever touched me. She like broached the subject and was like, because I think she thought something's off, like something's off with her, and I don't know what it is. Like, I think she was trying to piece it together and couldn't figure out, and so she thought it had probably been my dad. And I remember asking me about that, and I was like, no. Like, my dad was a lot of things. Like, he was, he was a larger than life, like, like kind of like big fish character, kind of like tall tales and violent at times, and like just charismatic. He had all these facets to him, but though he was not predatory with me, or and there was nothing sexual. It was my mother's father that had started sexually abusing me when we moved from the Midwest to California, and it was really hard. It was hard for me to deal with as a kid. Because I had looked at, we came from the Midwest, for kind of a respite. Like, we were looking for like sanctuary here. Sure. Like, we had come from a very, very, volatile situation in the Midwest, my mother and I, and come out to the Bay Area, and I was like, okay, like I can relax now. Like, like there was that feeling, like I was young, I was like 9 years old. And almost immediately, my grandfather started making advances toward me. My mom was, trying to work. She was working a lot. We were living in their house. And so I was at such a vulnerable place, and I didn't know how to deal with it. Yeah. I didn't know how to process it. I didn't know how to stop it. I didn't know who to tell. Like, it was like he really took advantage of me at my most vulnerable time, like having come from this like really hard situation with I don't want to give away too much of my book, but there was like a kidnapping plot with me, and I was drugged, and like all this stuff. Like, I had come from that, and then had to deal with my grandfather making sexual advances and sexually assaulting me. So it was a lot. It was a lot to deal with as a kid. Like, it would be a lot as an adult to deal with. But it was hard.
Goodness.
Yeah.
How did you, or do you struggle now with trust, especially with intimacy?
I do. I'm aware that I have certain trust issues, but I think also, like, because I've done I've been in therapy for so long. I've been in therapy forever. Yeah. So I think I have a great therapist, like, and I've worked with him for literally decades, and I have such a great relationship with him, and he knows so much of my story, and he's known it I started working with him when I was 13, 14, and I've worked with him all my life. Like, I've worked with other therapists, but I kind of always go back to him because I'm like, oh my God, I have to explain all this stuff to them. Like, I'll just go back to Jeff because he knows, like he knows how I react to things, and how the turnaround time on processing things, and kind of my trigger points. Mm-hmm. So of course I struggled. Like, it's something, when you've been assaulted in that way as a child, there's no way it's not going to impact you for life. There's no way. Mm-hmm. But I can recognize when I'm feeling like, you can feel the ratcheting sensation in you. Like, when you're like, oh, I know this feeling, like, I know what this is. So I know how to deal with it. And, like, I used drugs and alcohol to lubricate like that, or like dull that sensation for so long that like it takes practice to learn, like when you have those feelings come up where it's like, oh, this feels familiar, what does this remind me of? Oh, it's that feeling. Okay, how do I deal with that? What's my go-to to process that and to go through this? So it's just a lot of practice and a lot of like it took me a long time to get to that point. And I think it's a work in progress. Like every day is a work in progress.
This is the Knocking Doors Down podcast, featuring celebrities, experts, and everyday people who have overcome adversities, including addiction, mental health, and trauma, to live purposeful lives. And that's what Knocking Doors Down is all about.